The setup, when pride meets reality. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Camp Pendleton as Sergeant Mike Rodriguez wiped sweat from his forehead. He had been training Marines for 8 years, and today was supposed to be routine. The annual marksmanship competition was drawing near, and his squad needed to prove they were the best shooters in the battalion. Rodriguez had handpicked these men from hundreds of candidates. Each one could hit a target at 500 yards without breaking a sweat. Private Jake Thompson adjusted his scope for the 10th time that morning. At 22, he was considered one of the finest marksmen to come through basic training in years. His drill instructors called him a natural. Jake could thread a needle at 300 yards, or so the stories went around the barracks. Today, he was determined to show everyone that the stories were true. Corporal Danny Chen lay flat on his stomach, eye pressed to his rifle scope. He had won 3 shooting competitions in the past year. The walls of his quarters were covered with medals and certificates. Danny's steady hands never shook, not even when bullets were flying over his head during combat training. He took pride in being called Iceman by his fellow Marines. Staff Sergeant Luis Morales had been shooting since he was 12 years old. His father taught him to hunt deer in the mountains of Colorado. Luis could calculate wind speed and bullet drop in his head faster than most people could use a calculator. He had served 2 tours overseas and never missed a target that mattered. Today should have been easy for him. The target stood 800 yards away across the dusty training ground. It was a standard military silhouette, black against the brown hillside. The distance was challenging but not impossible for trained Marines. The wind was calm, and visibility was perfect. Everything seemed set up for success. Rodriguez called his men to attention. "Listen up, Marines. Today we're testing our skills for the upcoming competition. Each of you gets 5 shots. The Marine with the highest score gets a 3-day pass and bragging rights for the next month. Miss the target entirely, and you're on kitchen duty for a week." The Marines nodded confidently. They had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Their rifles were clean and properly zeroed. Their ammunition was match grade, designed for accuracy. Each man had studied the range conditions and practiced their breathing techniques. There was no reason to worry. Thompson stepped up to the firing line first. He settled into his shooting position with practiced ease. His breathing slowed to a steady rhythm. He aligned his sights perfectly with the target. The crosshairs settled right in the center of the silhouette. Thompson squeezed the trigger with gentle, steady pressure. The bullet sailed wide, hitting dirt 6 feet to the right of the target. Thompson blinked in disbelief. He had never missed so badly in his life. Maybe it was just nerves or a bad round of ammunition. He adjusted his aim slightly to the left and fired again. This shot went even wider, missing the target completely. "What the hell, Thompson?" Rodriguez shouted from behind him. "Are you shooting with your eyes closed?" Thompson's face turned red with embarrassment. He fired his remaining 3 shots quickly, desperate to hit something. Each bullet missed the target by an even wider margin. By his final shot, he was aiming almost 10 feet to the left of the target, but the bullets kept curving away to the right. Chen took his place at the firing line with confidence. He had watched Thompson's failure and assumed it was just rookie nerves. Chen was a veteran. He knew how to handle pressure. He took careful aim, controlling his breathing exactly as he had been trained. His first shot missed by 8 feet. "This is impossible," Chen muttered under his breath. He tried to compensate for whatever was pulling his shots to the right. He aimed far to the left of the target and fired again. The bullet still went wide right, as if some invisible force was pushing it off course. Rodriguez was getting angry now. 2 of his best shooters had just embarrassed themselves in front of the entire training group. Other Marines from different squads had gathered to watch the spectacle. Word was spreading that Rodriguez's elite marksman couldn't hit the broad side of a barn. Morales stepped up to the line with determination. He was the most experienced shooter in the group. If anyone could figure out what was wrong, it would be him. He spent extra time studying the target through his scope, looking for any clue about what might be affecting the shots. The target looked normal. The distance markers were correct. The wind flags hung limp in the still air. Morales couldn't see anything that would explain the wild misses. He aimed carefully and fired. His bullet missed by 12 feet, the worst shot of the day so far. "This is ridiculous!" Morales shouted, slamming his rifle butt into the ground. "Something is wrong with this range." The other two Marines in the squad fared no better. Their shots scattered across the hillside like they were shooting blindfolded. After 30 minutes of shooting, not a single Marine had managed to hit the target even once. The pile of spent brass at their feet told the story of complete failure. Rodriguez was furious and confused. These were some of the best shooters in the Marine Corps. They had all qualified as expert marksmen on this same range just months before. Their rifles had been inspected and found to be in perfect condition. The ammunition came from the same lot they had used successfully many times before. A crowd of Marines had gathered to watch the disaster unfold. Some were laughing and making jokes about Rodriguez's crack team of marksmen. Others were genuinely puzzled by what they were seeing. It defied all logic and training. "Maybe the target moved," someone joked from the crowd. "Maybe they forgot how to aim," another voice called out. Rodriguez ignored the comments and walked downrange to inspect the target himself. He needed to find an explanation for what was happening. As he got closer to the target, he noticed something strange in the dirt around it. There were bullet holes everywhere, but none in the target itself. Looking more carefully at the hillside, Rodriguez saw that all the bullets had hit in roughly the same area, about 10 feet to the right of the target. The grouping was actually quite tight, which meant his Marines were shooting accurately. They were just aiming at the wrong place. Rodriguez looked back toward the firing line, then at the target, then at the impact area. Something was definitely wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. The target was exactly where it was supposed to be. The firing line was in the correct position. The distance markers were accurate. As he stood there scratching his head, Rodriguez heard a young voice call out from behind him. "Excuse me, Sergeant. I think I know what's wrong." Rodriguez turned around to see a teenage girl walking across the range toward him. She was wearing civilian clothes and had long brown hair tied back in a ponytail. She looked to be about 17 years old and definitely didn't belong on a military firing range. "Hey, you can't be here!" Rodriguez shouted. "This is a restricted area." The girl held up her hands peacefully. "I'm sorry, Sergeant. I'm Sarah Martinez. My dad is Colonel Martinez, the base commander. I was visiting him when I heard all the shouting over here. I think I can help you solve your problem." Rodriguez recognized the name. Colonel Martinez was indeed the base commander, and he was known to be very protective of his only daughter. Rodriguez also knew that the colonel's daughter was supposed to be some kind of shooting prodigy, though he had never paid much attention to the stories. "With all due respect, miss, this is a serious military training exercise. We don't need help from civilians, especially not from teenagers," Rodriguez said firmly. Sarah smiled politely but didn't back down. "I understand, Sergeant, but I really think I know what's wrong. Could I just take a quick look at your target setup?" Rodriguez was about to refuse when he heard his Marines laughing and joking about their failure in the distance. His reputation was already ruined for the day. What could it hurt to let the colonel's daughter take a look? At worst, she would confirm that he had a real mystery on his hands. "Fine," Rodriguez said with a heavy sigh. "Take a look, but make it quick, and stay behind me at all times." Sarah walked past the target and continued up the hillside, studying the ground carefully. Rodriguez followed her, wondering what she thought she might find that he had missed. After about 50 yards, Sarah stopped and pointed at something in the dirt. "There," she said simply. "That's your problem." Rodriguez looked where she was pointing but saw nothing unusual. Just rocks, dirt, and scrub brush like everywhere else on the range. "I don't see anything," he admitted. Sarah knelt down and picked up what looked like a small piece of twisted metal. She held it up for Rodriguez to see. This is a piece of rebar from old construction work. It's buried in the ground at an angle, pointing right at your firing line. The iron in the steel is affecting the magnetic field around your target area. Your bullets have steel cores, so they're being pulled slightly off course as they pass over this spot. Rodriguez stared at the piece of metal in disbelief. Could something so small really affect rifle bullets traveling at high speed? It seemed impossible, but he had to admit that Sarah's explanation was the first thing that made any sense all day. "You really think this little piece of scrap metal is causing all our problems?" he asked skeptically. Sarah nodded confidently. "I'm sure of it. I've seen this happen before at civilian shooting competitions. Metal detectors and underground pipes can throw off shots in ways that most people never think about. Your Marines are actually shooting very accurately. They're just compensating for something they can't see." Rodriguez looked back at his Marines, who were still standing around the firing line looking defeated and embarrassed. If Sarah was right, their failure wasn't due to poor training or equipment problems. It was just bad luck and an unusual situation that none of them had encountered before. "So what do you suggest we do about it?" Rodriguez asked. Sarah pointed to a spot about 20 yards to the left. "Move your target over there, away from the buried metal. Or, if you want to keep it in the same place, your Marines need to aim about 10 feet to the left to compensate for the magnetic pull." Rodriguez considered both options. Moving the target would be easier, but it would also mean admitting that a teenager had solved a problem that had stumped trained Marines. On the other hand, if Sarah was wrong, he would look even more foolish than he already did. "Tell you what," Rodriguez said finally. "If you're so confident about this, why don't you prove it? Take a shot at the target from the firing line. If you can hit it, I'll believe your explanation." Sarah hesitated for a moment. She had been shooting competitively for years, but never with military weapons in front of a crowd of Marines. The pressure was enormous, and if she missed, she would look like just another know-it-all kid who couldn't back up her big talk. "Okay," Sarah said quietly. "I'll try." As they walked back toward the firing line, Rodriguez wondered what he had gotten himself into. If the colonel's daughter got hurt on his range, his career would be over. If she made his Marines look bad by outshooting them, his reputation would be ruined in a different way. Either outcome would be a disaster for him. But Rodriguez was also curious. If Sarah really could hit the target when his expert marksman couldn't, it would prove that she understood something about shooting that they didn't, and that knowledge might be valuable for future training. The crowd of Marines grew larger as word spread that a civilian girl was going to attempt the shot that had defeated their best marksman. Some were openly skeptical, making jokes about letting kids play with military weapons. Others were genuinely interested to see what would happen. Sarah approached the firing line with steady confidence, but Rodriguez could see her hands trembling slightly. The weight of everyone's expectations was clearly affecting her, despite her calm exterior. She was just a teenager, after all, and this was unlike any shooting situation she had ever faced before. Rodriguez handed her his personal rifle, which had been zeroed perfectly that morning. The weapon was heavier than what Sarah was used to, and the military scope was different from civilian hunting scopes. She spent a few minutes adjusting the stock length and getting comfortable with the controls. "Take your time," Rodriguez said quietly. "There's no rush." But Sarah could feel dozens of eyes watching her every move. The Marines had grown silent, waiting to see if the colonel's daughter could succeed where they had failed. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah settled into a prone shooting position and began to line up her shot. This was the moment when everything would be decided. Either her theory about the buried metal was correct, or she was about to embarrass herself in front of an entire Marine unit. The target seemed impossibly small at 800 yards, especially with all the pressure she was feeling. Sarah took a deep breath and tried to calm her racing heart. She had made shots like this hundreds of times before, but never when so much was riding on the outcome. As she placed the crosshairs on the target, Sarah remembered her father's advice about shooting under pressure. Trust your training, he had always told her. Don't overthink it, just breathe, aim, and squeeze. Sarah took one final breath and began to squeeze the trigger slowly and steadily. The moment of truth had arrived, and everyone on the range held their breath waiting to see what would happen next. The moment of truth. When skill meets skepticism. The rifle cracked like thunder across the silent range. Every Marine present followed the invisible path of the bullet as it streaked toward the distant target. For a split second, time seemed frozen as everyone waited to see where Sarah's shot would land. A small puff of dust erupted from the center of the target's silhouette. Direct hit. The silence that followed was deafening. Nobody moved or spoke for several long seconds. The Marines stared at the target in disbelief, then at Sarah, then back at the target again. A 17-year-old girl had just accomplished what 5 expert Marine marksmen had failed to do all morning. "Impossible," whispered Private Thompson, his voice barely audible. Corporal Chen shook his head slowly. "She got lucky. Had to be luck." But Sergeant Rodriguez was already reaching for his binoculars to get a closer look at the target. Through the powerful lenses, he could clearly see the fresh bullet hole punched through the black silhouette right in the center scoring ring. It wasn't luck. It was a perfect shot. Sarah stood up from the firing line, her legs a bit shaky from the adrenaline. She handed the rifle back to Rodriguez with a small smile. "I told you the problem was the buried metal," she said simply. Rodriguez lowered his binoculars and looked at Sarah with new respect. "How did you know to compensate for it?" "My grandfather taught me to always look for things that might affect bullet flight," Sarah explained. "He was a sniper in Korea, and he used to tell me stories about impossible shots that missed because of things nobody thought about. Magnetic interference, temperature changes, even the rotation of the Earth can affect long-distance shooting." The crowd of Marines pressed closer, eager to hear more. Most of them had never considered that environmental factors beyond wind could affect their shots. In all their training, nobody had taught them about magnetic interference from buried metal. Staff Sergeant Morales stepped forward. "With respect, miss, how do you know so much about long-range shooting? Are you some kind of professional?" Sarah laughed softly. "Not professional, but I've been competing since I was 12. My dad started taking me to civilian shooting matches when I was little. I've shot in competitions all over California and Nevada. You learn to deal with all kinds of weird conditions when you're competing outdoors." Rodriguez was starting to understand. While his Marines had trained exclusively on military ranges with standardized conditions, Sarah had experience with unpredictable civilian ranges where anything could happen. She had learned to troubleshoot problems that military training never covered. "So you really think the buried metal was throwing off all our shots?" Rodriguez asked. "I'm certain of it," Sarah replied. "The grouping pattern your Marines were shooting proved they have excellent marksmanship skills. All their shots were hitting in the same area, just consistently to the right of the target. That's classic magnetic interference, not poor shooting technique." Private Thompson couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. "But how did you know where to aim to compensate for it?" Sarah thought for a moment before answering. "Experience, mostly. I've dealt with similar problems before, so I had a good idea how much the magnetic field would pull the bullets off course. Plus, I could see where your shots were hitting, so I knew roughly how much adjustment was needed." Corporal Chen was still skeptical. "One shot proves nothing. Anyone can get lucky once." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "You're right. One shot could be luck. Would you like me to shoot again?" Chen nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. If you can do it twice, I'll believe you really know what you're doing." Rodriguez hesitated. Letting a civilian fire military weapons was already pushing the boundaries of regulations. Letting her shoot multiple times could get him in serious trouble if anyone reported it. but his curiosity outweighed his caution. "One more shot," he agreed, "but that's it." Sarah returned to the firing line and took her position. This time the pressure felt different. She had already proven her point with the first shot, so the second one was just for show. But she also knew that the Marines were watching her technique carefully, looking for any sign that the first shot really had been lucky. She settled behind the rifle scope and lined up her shot exactly as before. The target looked the same, the wind conditions hadn't changed, and the buried metal was still in the same place. Sarah made the same compensation for magnetic interference and squeezed the trigger. Another perfect center hit. This time, several Marines actually cheered. The skepticism was rapidly turning into admiration. Even Chen had to admit that 2 perfect shots in a row couldn't be explained by luck alone. "Incredible," Rodriguez muttered. "Absolutely incredible." But Sarah wasn't finished yet. She looked up at Rodriguez with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Sergeant, would you like me to prove my theory about the magnetic interference?" "What do you mean?" Rodriguez asked. "Let me shoot at the target from a different position, where the buried metal won't affect the bullet path. If I'm right about the magnetic interference, your Marines should be able to hit the target from that position using their normal aiming technique." Rodriguez considered this. It would be a perfect test of Sarah's theory. If the magnetic interference was really the problem, then shooting from a different angle should eliminate it entirely. His Marines would be able to hit the target without any special compensation. "Where would you suggest we shoot from?" he asked. Sarah pointed to a spot about 50 yards to the right of the current firing line. "From over there, the bullet path wouldn't pass over the buried metal. The magnetic field shouldn't affect shots fired from that angle." Rodriguez looked at the suggested position. It would mean shooting at the target from a slightly different angle, but the distance would be the same. If Sarah's theory was correct, it would prove once and for all that his Marines were excellent marksmen who had simply been fighting an invisible enemy. "Thompson," Rodriguez called out, "set up your gear at that position and take a shot." Thompson gathered his equipment and moved to the new firing position. He was eager to redeem himself after the morning's embarrassing failure. As he settled into his shooting stance, Thompson felt his confidence returning. This time would be different. Thompson lined up his shot using exactly the same technique he had used all morning. He didn't make any special adjustments or compensations. He simply aimed at the center of the target and fired. Direct hit. The Marines erupted in cheers and applause. Thompson's shot had struck the target dead center, proving that his marksmanship skills were just as good as they had always been. The problem really had been the magnetic interference from the buried metal. "My turn," Chen announced, moving quickly to the new firing position. Chen's shot was also a perfect hit. Then Morales took his turn and scored another center hit. One by one, all the Marines who had failed so miserably from the original firing line were now shooting perfect scores from the new position. Rodriguez watched in amazement as his failed marksmen transformed back into the expert shooters he knew them to be. Sarah's explanation had been correct in every detail. The buried metal had been creating a magnetic field that pulled steel core bullets off course, but only along certain angles of approach. "Miss Martinez," Rodriguez said formally, "I owe you an apology. You solved a problem that none of us could figure out, and you did it in a matter of minutes. That's some impressive detective work." Sarah smiled modestly. "Thank you, Sergeant. But really, your Marines are excellent shooters. They just needed someone to identify what was working against them." The crowd of Marines began to disperse, excitedly discussing what they had just witnessed. The story would spread quickly throughout the base. By evening, everyone would know about the teenage girl who had outshot Marine marksmen and solved a mystery that had stumped trained professionals. But Rodriguez wasn't quite finished yet. An idea was forming in his mind, one that could benefit both Sarah and his Marines. "Miss Martinez," he said carefully, "would you be interested in sharing some of your knowledge with my Marines? It's clear that you've learned things in civilian competition that we don't cover in military training." Sarah looked surprised by the suggestion. "What kind of knowledge?" "Environmental factors that can affect shooting accuracy," Rodriguez explained. "Things like magnetic interference, temperature variations, humidity changes, the kind of real-world problems you might encounter in civilian competitions, but that we don't typically address in standardized military training." Sarah considered this thoughtfully. She had always enjoyed teaching younger shooters at civilian matches, and the opportunity to work with Marines would be both challenging and rewarding. "I'd be honored to help," she said finally. "But wouldn't there be regulations against having a civilian instruct Marines?" Rodriguez grinned. "Not if we call it consulting instead of instruction. Besides, your father is the base commander. I'm sure he could authorize some kind of informal knowledge-sharing arrangement." The idea was becoming more appealing by the minute. Sarah's expertise in dealing with unusual shooting conditions could give Rodriguez's Marines a significant advantage in upcoming competitions. And Sarah would gain valuable experience working with military-grade weapons and training methods. "When would you want to start?" Sarah asked. "How about next week?" Rodriguez suggested. "We have another competition coming up in a month, and I'd like my Marines to be prepared for any surprises." As they shook hands on the agreement, Rodriguez reflected on the morning's events. He had started the day expecting routine marksmanship training with predictable results. Instead, he had witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he knew about shooting. A teenage girl had not only outperformed his best marksman, but she had also taught him valuable lessons about factors that could affect shooting accuracy. Rodriguez realized that there was still much to learn about the science of marksmanship, and Sarah Martinez might be the perfect teacher. Private Thompson approached Rodriguez as the crowd continued to disperse. "Sergeant, I have to ask, how did she know to look for buried metal? That's not something anyone would normally think about." Rodriguez shrugged. "Experience, Thompson. Real-world experience with problems that don't exist in textbooks. That's what we're going to learn from her." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "So, we're really going to work with her?" "If she's willing to work with us," Rodriguez confirmed. "And if her father approves the arrangement." As Sarah walked back toward the base headquarters to find her father, she thought about the unusual morning she had just experienced. She had come to visit her dad for a routine lunch appointment, and ended up solving a mystery that had stumped an entire Marine unit. The experience had been both thrilling and nerve-wracking. Shooting under pressure in front of skeptical Marines was unlike anything she had faced in civilian competitions. But it had also shown her that her skills and knowledge could be valuable in ways she had never imagined. Sarah was looking forward to working with Rodriguez's Marines. They were clearly skilled marksmen who simply needed exposure to the kind of environmental factors that civilian competitors dealt with regularly. Teaching them would be a challenge, but also an opportunity to learn from their military training methods. As she reached the headquarters building, Sarah could already hear Rodriguez explaining the morning's events to other instructors. The story was spreading, and by tomorrow, everyone on the base would know about the teenage girl who had solved the Marines' shooting mystery. Sarah smiled to herself as she opened the door to her father's office. It had been an interesting morning, and she had a feeling that even more interesting days lay ahead. The Marines couldn't land the shot until a girl took the rifle, but now, working together, they might accomplish things that neither could achieve alone. The partnership between civilian expertise and military precision was about to begin, and both sides had much to learn from each other. The transformation, when teaching becomes learning. 3 weeks later, Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of Camp Pendleton's advanced training range, watching Rodriguez's Marines prepare for the most important shooting competition of their careers. The Regional Marksmanship Championship would determine which unit represented the West Coast at the National Military Shooting Finals. Everything they had worked for came down to this single day. The transformation in the Marines had been remarkable. What started as informal consultation sessions had evolved into intensive training workshops that attracted marksmen from throughout the base. Sarah's unconventional teaching methods had opened their eyes to aspects of shooting they had never considered. Private Thompson adjusted his rifle scope with newfound confidence. 3 weeks ago, he had been devastated by his failure to hit a simple target. Now he understood that his shooting technique had never been the problem. Sarah had taught him to read environmental conditions like a detective searching for clues. "Remember what Sarah taught us about thermal currents," Thompson whispered to Corporal Chen. "The morning air is still cool, but the ground is starting to heat up. Watch for heat mirages that could distort your sight picture." Chen nodded, scanning the terrain between the firing line and the targets. Sarah had shown them how to spot the subtle visual distortions that indicated rising heat waves. In military training, they had learned about wind flags and basic weather conditions. But Sarah's civilian competition experience had taught them to notice dozens of other environmental factors. Staff Sergeant Morales was busy taking temperature readings and recording wind patterns in a notebook. Before working with Sarah, he had relied purely on instinct and basic training protocols. Now he approached each shot like a scientist conducting an experiment, carefully documenting every variable that might affect bullet flight. "Temperature is rising faster than expected," Morales reported to his team. "Sarah's formula suggests we need to adjust our elevation settings by 1 click to compensate for the changing air density." The other Marines nodded and made the adjustment. Sarah had taught them that hot air was less dense than cold air, which meant bullets would fly slightly higher as the day warmed up. It was a tiny effect that most shooters never considered. But at long ranges, tiny effects could mean the difference between hitting and missing. Rodriguez watched his Marines with pride and amazement. They were applying scientific principles to marksmanship in ways that went far beyond standard military training. Sarah had not only taught them new techniques, but she had changed their entire approach to thinking about shooting. Colonel Martinez stood beside Rodriguez, observing the preparations. As base commander, he had initially been skeptical of the arrangement between his daughter and the Marine marksman, but the results spoke for themselves. Rodriguez's unit had gone from struggling with basic accuracy to becoming the most technically sophisticated shooting team on the base. "Your daughter has quite a gift for teaching," Rodriguez told the colonel. "She's turned my Marines into precision shooting scientists." Colonel Martinez smiled with fatherly pride. "Sarah has always been special with a rifle, but watching her work with your Marines has shown me abilities I never knew she possessed. She's a natural instructor." The competition was about to begin, and teams from 6 different military installations were preparing to test their skills. The format would be challenging: multiple distances, varying weather conditions, and time pressure that would test both accuracy and adaptability. Sarah stood behind the firing line with Rodriguez, serving as an unofficial advisor. Competition regulations prevented her from actively coaching during the event, but her presence provided moral support for the Marines she had trained. "Are you nervous?" Rodriguez asked her quietly. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "These guys have worked so hard. I'll feel responsible if they don't do well." Rodriguez shook his head. "You've given them tools they never had before. Win or lose, they're better marksmen because of what you've taught them. That's already a victory." The first stage of the competition began at 600 yards. Standard military procedure called for shooters to fire from predetermined positions using basic environmental adjustments. But Sarah's Marines had a different plan. Thompson took the first shot for his team. Instead of rushing to engage the target, he spent precious seconds analyzing the conditions. He noted the wind direction, estimated the air temperature, and checked for visual distortions caused by heat mirages. Only then did he line up his shot. Perfect center hit. Chen followed with the same methodical approach. He ignored the pressure of the ticking clock and focused on reading the environmental conditions exactly as Sarah had taught him. His shot was equally accurate. One by one, Rodriguez's Marines delivered flawless performances. While other teams rushed to beat the time limit, Sarah's students took their time to analyze conditions properly. The extra seconds spent on preparation paid off with consistently accurate shooting. They look different, Colonel Martinez observed. More confident, more systematic. Rodriguez nodded. Sarah taught them that rushing leads to mistakes. Better to use the time available to guarantee accuracy than to finish fast with poor scores. The second stage moved to 800 yards with gusty crosswinds. This was where Sarah's teaching really began to show its value. While other teams struggled to compensate for the shifting wind patterns, Rodriguez's Marines were reading multiple environmental indicators simultaneously. Morales called out observations to his teammates. Wind flags show 12 miles per hour from the left, but watch the dust patterns near the target. There's a downdraft creating a swirl effect about halfway downrange. Sarah had taught them that wind conditions could vary significantly along the bullet's flight path. Simple wind flags at the firing line told only part of the story. Experienced competitive shooters learned to read dust, grass movement, and even bird flight patterns to understand wind conditions at different distances. Thompson made his adjustment and fired. Another perfect hit. The crowd of observers began to take notice of Rodriguez's team. While other units were struggling with the challenging conditions, these Marines were shooting as if the wind didn't exist. Their systematic approach to environmental analysis was giving them a significant advantage. "How are they doing that?" asked a Marine from a competing team. "Training with a civilian competitive shooter," someone explained. "She taught them techniques that aren't covered in standard military training." Word began to spread among the competition officials about the unusual preparation methods that Rodriguez's team had used. Some questioned whether civilian instruction should be allowed in military competitions. Others were impressed by the innovative approach to marksmanship training. The third stage presented the ultimate challenge: 1,000-yard shots in rapidly changing conditions. Clouds were moving across the sun, creating alternating periods of bright light and shadow. The temperature was rising, and thermal currents were creating visible heat mirages. This was exactly the type of complex environmental situation that Sarah had prepared her students to handle. While other teams struggled to adapt to the constantly changing conditions, Rodriguez's Marines began their systematic analysis. "Light is changing every 30 seconds, Chen observed. We need to time our shots for consistent lighting conditions. Thermal currents are strongest near the target," Thompson added. "The heat mirage is creating a visual distortion that makes the target appear slightly higher than it actually is." Sarah watched from the sidelines as her students applied everything she had taught them. They were facing conditions that would challenge even experienced civilian competitors, but they were approaching the problem with scientific methodology instead of guesswork. Morales took the first shot for the long-range stage. He waited for a cloud to pass over the sun, ensuring consistent lighting. He compensated for the thermal currents based on their visual indicators. His bullet struck the center of the distant target with mechanical precision. The other teams began to realize they were witnessing something special. Rodriguez's Marines weren't just shooting well, they were demonstrating a level of environmental awareness that most marksmen never achieved. Each shot was the result of careful analysis rather than hope and instinct. Chen's shot was equally precise. Thompson followed with another center hit. By the time Morales took his final shot, Rodriguez's team had achieved something remarkable: perfect scores at all three distances despite increasingly challenging conditions. The final results confirmed what everyone had already observed. Rodriguez's team had won the competition by the largest margin in the event's history. More importantly, they had demonstrated shooting techniques that impressed even the most experienced military instructors. Colonel Martinez approached Sarah as the awards ceremony concluded. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished here. You've taught these Marines things that our standard training never covered." Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They taught me things too, Colonel. Working with Marines showed me how to apply competitive shooting techniques in high-pressure situations. It made me a better shooter and a better teacher. Rodriguez joined them, still glowing with pride over his team's victory. Sarah, I have a proposition for you. The Marine Corps is always looking for innovative training methods. Would you be interested in developing a formal curriculum based on what you've taught my Marines? The suggestion took Sarah by surprise. She had never imagined that her civilian competition experience could lead to a career in military training, but the past 3 weeks had shown her that she had valuable knowledge to share and a gift for teaching that could benefit many more Marines. What kind of curriculum? She asked. Environmental marksmanship analysis, Rodriguez explained. Teaching Marines to read conditions like competitive shooters do. The techniques you've shown us could revolutionize how we approach long-range shooting training. Sarah looked at the Marines she had worked with, now celebrating their victory with justified pride. Thompson was explaining thermal current analysis to Marines from other teams. Chen was demonstrating how to spot wind patterns using dust and vegetation. Morales was sharing the mathematical formulas Sarah had taught him for calculating environmental corrections. Her students had become teachers themselves, spreading the knowledge she had shared with them. The impact of their work together was already growing beyond what any of them had originally imagined. I'd be honored to help develop that curriculum, Sarah said finally, but I have one condition. Name it, Rodriguez replied. The Marines have to promise to keep teaching me too. I learned as much from working with them as they learned from me. Any formal program should be a partnership, not just one-way instruction. Rodriguez grinned and extended his hand for a shake. Deal. Partners in the science of marksmanship. As they shook hands, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 3 weeks ago, she had been a teenage civilian who happened to solve a shooting mystery. Now she was being asked to help revolutionize military marksmanship training. The Marines couldn't land the shot until a girl took the rifle, but the real story was what happened next. How civilian expertise and military precision combined to create something better than either could achieve alone. The partnership that began with one impossible shot had grown into a transformation that would benefit marksmen for years to come. Thompson approached Sarah as the celebration continued around them. Thank you for everything you taught us. We never would have won this without your help. Sarah smiled at the young Marine. You always had the skill, Thompson. I just helped you understand what was working against you. The victory belongs to you and your teammates. But you changed how we think about shooting, Chen added, joining the conversation. That's something we'll carry with us for the rest of our careers. Sarah looked around at the Marines celebrating their victory, using techniques she had taught them to help other units improve their shooting. The knowledge was spreading, growing, evolving as it passed from person to person. The girl who took the rifle had become a teacher. The Marines who couldn't land the shot had become champions. And together, they had proven that the best learning happens when different worlds of expertise come together to create something entirely new. The competition was over, but their partnership was just beginning. In a few months, they would begin developing the curriculum that would teach future Marines to read environmental conditions like scientists and shoot like champions. The impossible shot that started it all had become the foundation for a new approach to marksmanship that would impact military training for generations. Sarah Martinez had come to visit her father for lunch and ended up changing how the Marine Corps thought about shooting. The Marines couldn't land the shot until a girl took the rifle, but the real magic happened when they learned to work together, combining their different strengths to achieve something neither could accomplish alone.